Is Antifa preparing for a summer of violence? I think so. And I don't say this because it's just speculation. I say this by virtue of anecdotal experience, as well as what I see happening all around the world and in the United States. Just take, for example, a few things that have happened just in the last 2 weeks. You've got this past weekend in Boulder, Colorado, a firebombing that occurred where an illegal immigrant Muslim essentially attacked a peaceful kind of remembrance that was occurring in remembrance of hostages in Gaza, Israeli hostages in Gaza. He firebombed those people, and he also engaged in deploying a makeshift kind of flamethrower against them. Landed 8 people in the hospital. There's another situation that happened at Cal Anderson Park in Seattle with Antifa physically attacking and assaulting Christian worship service in the park. And the mayor there in Seattle essentially blaming the Christians for fomenting the violence. Typical abuser move. There's the Palm Springs bombing of an in vitro fertilization clinic a couple weeks ago. During that, a couple days later, there was the killing of 2 Israeli embassy staffers in Washington, D.C. So these are just a handful of things that have been happening, but they're all ideologically driven by a form of Antifa Marxism. The 25-year-old suspected IVF bomber in Palm Springs was, interestingly enough, was connected to someone in Seattle, which is a hotbed for Antifa, was ideologically driven by a Marxist brand of Antifa. He promoting anarchy and anti-capitalism, but animated by environmentalism. So he was afraid that the earth was, human beings are essentially a virus and they need to stop procreating. And so we need to declare war on pro-lifers. And so he looked at the IVF clinic as this baby making place. And he needed to send a message that we needed to destroy these kinds of people who are essentially ultimately going to destroy the planet. Similarly, a 31-year-old Chicago man, I think he's maybe 32 now, but he allegedly shot 2 Israeli, I say allegedly because you have to say this stuff, 2 Israeli embassy workers a few days later, animated also by Marxist Antifa. But the pet issue here is Palestine, right? Free Palestine, Palestinian socialist liberation kind of movement. A witness to the shooting, most people don't know this, but a witness to the shooting said that as the police arrived, the suspect pulled out a red keffiyeh and repeatedly yelled, "Free Palestine." Many people saw that in a video, "Free Palestine, free Palestine." But the keffiyeh is a traditional headdress worn by Palestinian men. A red one is believed to be connected with Palestinian Marxists. And similarly, the Hamas spokesman Abu Obadiah, or Obaida, I don't know how to pronounce that, after the massacre on October 7th in 2023, he was wearing one as well. But again, all these attacks are not isolated incidents. They're just the latest in a string of Antifa attacks over the last several years. But what Antifa does is they leapfrog from one issue to another issue. These are pet issues that are typically held by left-leaning progressives. In fact, the recent attacks on the Tesla enterprise, do you remember those? They're strikingly similar to other Antifa actions, like the BLM riots after the George Floyd incident, the eco-terrorism protests with respect to Stop Cop City and their sister protests in places like Madison, Jane's revenge attacks on pro-life groups like we experienced in the Buffalo office and after Roe v. Wade was overturned, transgender calls for armed revolution, as well as the pro-Palestinian protests that we saw after the Hamas terror attacks, where they were calling for an Al-Aqsa flood, a global day of terror, and all these kinds of things, trying to instigate other Islamists all across the world to engage in attacks against anybody who supports Israel. As a leader of a pro-life medical network in New York, targeted by Antifa, it's clear to me, anyway, Antifa does not care about Tesla. They don't care about Palestine. They don't care about the environment. Antifa does not care about abortion. In fact, there's an Antifa fellow named Mark Bray who wrote a book called the Anti-Fascist Handbook. And he wrote this book in a hurry, okay? Shortly after President Trump was elected the first time. And in his book, he basically tips the cards of Antifa. And he says, despite the various shades of interpretation, Antifa should not be understood as a single issue movement. Antifa should not be understood as a single issue movement. Okay, so what is it? What they do is they'll take these issues that animate the public, the various masses, the kind of weak-minded, disaffected, communist-educated youth, and foment their peaceful protests in some place or another, whether it be on campus or shutting down a highway or shutting down a pregnancy center or what have you. And they'll encourage recruitment to this kind of protest, and they'll pepper these protests, these peaceful protests, with aggressors that are willing to engage in violence, direct action violence. And then those protests will move to a point of direct action, like a pregnancy center. And they'll engage, similar to what happened with the attacks recently on the church service in Seattle. And then when the attack is quelled, or when law enforcement comes out and starts to quell the attack, they'll claim, oh, this is terrible. Look at all the oppression. Look at all the fascist oppression. And then that'll embarrass the police or the authorities in some form or fashion, and they'll back off. And it's another means to recruit. And so the violent attacks, like the attack on just recently in Boulder, Colorado, with this illegal Islamist immigrant, he said just today, I think it was today, I'd do it again. If I could do it again, I'd do it again. Well, what does that say? And why would the legacy media want people to know he'd do it again? Because it foments it. And by the way, they engage these attacks in liberal-leaning states that are going to treat them with kid gloves. You see these attacks happening in places like Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, Illinois, Michigan, New York. The authorities are going to turn a blind eye to the attacks. They're going to somehow say that these attacks were bona fide and they were instigated by these intolerant Christian people that insist on enslaving women by forcing them to become permanent socioeconomic underclass by demanding that they have their children. This is the kind of language they use. And so you've got politicians that pick up the same language. You got Senator Hirano out of Hawaii demanding that pro-abortion people literally pick up arms against pro-lifers. And then you've got this guy in Palm Springs, California, declaring war on pro-lifers. You've got communiques coming out of Jane's Revenge, the pro-abortion front group for Antifa, saying the war's already been declared. And they're going to use any and all of measures necessary to make sure that they can be their own standard, their own authority. It's really amazing to see. And this is probably one of the reasons why President Trump in his first term said the United States will be designating Antifa as a terrorist organization. Unfortunately, the Biden administration did not hold to that, and so they turned a blind eye away from attacks on CompassCare and other pro-life people. And beyond that, they took it a step further and began literally investigating pro-life people, pregnancy centers, and then throwing peaceful pro-lifers in federal prison with activist judges at the federal level like Colleen Collar-Cottley, who, God knows how, found over 10, maybe 12 pro-life people guilty of conspiracy against rights, trying to find a way to get the attorneys to tell her why the 13th Amendment does not guarantee a right to abortion. The 13th Amendment does not guarantee a right to... Tell me why the 13th Amendment doesn't guarantee a right to abortion. Just by way of review, the 13th Amendment is the amendment that came out after the Civil War saying it's illegal to enslave people, right? You can't enslave people. So what she's saying is that essentially people, pro-lifers who want to protect women and children from abortion are enslaving women. This is a classic Marxist ideological position. And she's a sitting federal judge. What do you do about that? So I'm just trying to help connect the dots here with respect to Antifa. Antifa, let me just clarify what Antifa is. Antifa is an international communist revolution with origins in Russian Marxism. as Bray mentioned in his book, as I mentioned Bray earlier, Mark Bray in his book, The Anti-Fascist Handbook, he admits that anti-fascism has played a crucial role in struggles around the world over the past century. You've got fascist Antifa elements all over Europe. Antifa is short for, of course, anti-fascism, but the Russian Marxist kind of version of fascism, their definition of fascism, is simply this: capitalism. That's it. Anybody that promotes a capitalistic free market concept of the economy is a fascist. And by the way, they're also, one of their primary tenets is atheism. Absolute atheism. It is a core tenet. You have to destroy the opiate of the masses, specifically Christianity. It's anti-Christian. And that's one of the reasons why churches have been attacked and pro-life entities have been attacked, because we believe the core belief that that undergirds the constitutional rule of law in the current global nation-state system is a Christian concept, and that is that we are endowed by our Creator, not our government, with certain unalienable rights. The right upon which all other rights are predicated is the right to life, because you can't exercise any other rights if you don't have life. And the government doesn't give you that. And Marxism has to destroy any type of relationship that takes precedent over the government's relationship with the individual. It has to hyper-atomize society and disconnect all people from any relationship that might hold sway over the government. That's God, that's your spouse, that's your children. And so it attempts to undermine the basic unit of society, which is the family, and replace it with the basic unit, a basic unit of society called the individual, whose primary relationship is with the government. And so Antifa's goal, ultimately, this is their stated goal, is to dismantle and destroy the nation-state system, the global nation-state system. And so that's one of the reasons I think you've got them attacking the United States, why you've got this insurgency happening in the United States, and as well as Israel. Israel is a representation of the nation-state system in the Middle East. And of course, the Middle Eastern nations are not interested in maintaining the global nation-state system as we understand it. And they're interested also in paving the way for a global power structure, just not necessarily communism. So I am Reverend Harden. This is Proof of Life.
Did you know that 84% of women wish they had been given more information prior to getting an abortion? Abortion rates have jumped by 90% in New York since the overturn of Roe v. Wade. There are 87 abortionists in the New York City metro region and tens of thousands of abortions every year, making New York the nation's abortion headquarters. With just 4 pro-life medical alternatives, many women are unable to access ethical alternatives to abortion. Women deserve better than abortion. CompassCare is the only pro-life medical service provider in Brooklyn and the Bronx and is now serving women on Staten Island. With a plan underway to save 40,000 babies from abortion in the next 10 years, the church, through CompassCare, is making a difference in America's abortion capital. Save a woman and baby from abortion for just $47 per month. Learn more and save a life today at CompassCareCommunity.com. That's CompassCareCommunity.com. Women deserve better than abortion.
The World Health Organization estimates 73 million abortions per year worldwide. Society permits and even applauds abortion only because it fundamentally misunderstands what it means to be a human under God. If we believe human existence is a cosmic accident just a little higher than animals, then abortion and any other form of human destruction can be justified by political expedience. But if humanity is made just a little lower than God, then all people are inherently valuable. Abortion then representing the greatest crime against humanity in history. And while abortion is a mountain of injustice, to a woman considering abortion, unplanned pregnancy often appears to her as an immovable mountain. CompassCare is moving the abortion mountain one woman, one baby at a time through ethical medical care and community support. Real Abortion News is sponsored by CompassCare.
What's next for Antifa? I have some thoughts. The summer of 2025 will be a summer of Antifa violence. The Antifa violence that we've seen heretofore, BLM riots and Tesla protests, the Stop Cop City initiatives, the James Revenge attacks on pro-life groups, transgender activity. A lot of that has been mostly disruptive socially. There have been pockets of lethal violence, but now you see a string of lethal violence happening. And so Antifa is basically, according to Rich Higgins, which is the President Trump's first term consultant around irregular warfare at the Pentagon, he recognized Antifa for what it is. It's an international Marxist insurgency designed to dismantle and destroy the nation-state system. And it piggybacks off of these left-wing causes in order to destabilize both the economy as well as to dismantle and topple the governmental structures of the constitutional rule of law. And they've been doing that from within, okay? So the fourth generation warfare essentially means that you can't send an army to fight another army because the insurgents are actually embedded in the population. And that's what's happening. You got pro-Palestinian protesters that are also Marxist in their orientation, similar to Antifa, that have come in illegally, that are here illegally, and they're literally now starting to physically attack people, like what happened in Boulder, Colorado a couple of days ago with an illegal immigrant from Egypt. So what's going to happen? I've made some predictions in the past after we were firebombed originally. I didn't know much about Antifa, and now I know more about Antifa than I want to know probably. And I've gotten pretty good at predicting what's going to happen with respect to their next move. We predicted that Antifa was going to attack us at some point in time. We actually notified the FBI 2 weeks in advance of the firebombing of CompassCare's Buffalo office because we started to see more intense activity going on across the country. And sure enough, we were firebombed. We predicted that the attacks would continue, and they did. We predicted that the Antifa sympathizers that had control over upper echelons of government, federal government in particular, also state government, would start to turn their investigative ire and begin to join Antifa in their attacks on pro-life people. They did. They not only turned a blind eye to over 500 attacks on peaceful pro-life organizations and churches, but they themselves started to investigate the victims, while at the same time targeting peaceful pro-life protesters who were praying and singing songs outside of abortion clinics and sending them to federal prison. Thankfully, President Trump pardoned them all, but we predicted that the attacks would shift from violence to lawfare. Legislation started to be written to attack pregnancy centers all across the country in these liberal states like Michigan, Colorado, Illinois, New York, California, etc. We predicted that the lawfare would continue, that activist attorney generals would begin to sue us. They did. Rob Bonta out of California sued pregnancy centers, saying that we're committing fraud and lying to women. Similar messaging that was being used by pro-abortion Jane's Revenge domestic terrorists, by the way. Letitia James did a copycat lawsuit against pregnancy centers and CompassCare in New York. We predicted that before it happened. These kinds of things. We also predicted that Donald Trump would probably get elected and we would get a break. We would get a little breather, that the lawfare would lessen and slacken. And it has. And thankfully, we've seen a lot of good things happening coming out of the Trump administration, but it has galvanized the rhetoric in extreme pro-abortion states like New York and Michigan and Colorado and Seattle and places like that. And the rhetoric coming out of these politicians' mouths, I believe, is fomenting recruitment tactics for engaging in the next wave of attacks. Make no mistake, there have been waves of protests, and in those protests, physical attacks. People have been killed. And I predicted back in 2022 after we were firebombed that they would start killing people. And they are now killing people. Make no mistake about it. It is a mistake to view this latest kind of string of killings and attacks as isolated lone actors. Now, they may be acting alone, but they are all driven by the same Marxist ideology that has been promoted in the United States educational system for several generations. This godless, atheistic, Darwinianistic, secular, socialistic content has been indoctrinating our youth. And now we've got a bunch of The result is we've got a bunch of weak-minded communist sympathizers in the voting bloc. And they're easily manipulated. Their emotions are easily manipulated. They're easily fomented to engage in protests, and those protests are populated by paid insurgents who are engaging in violent activity and ginning up the group to engage in more violent activity. We've seen that for example, the pro-Palestine protests, which are also, I think, another version of Antifa, they have the ability to coordinate nationwide and the ability to shut down highways and college campuses on the same day. On the same day. As a leader of a pro-life organization we host things like Walks for Life, Peaceful Family Walk for Life events, and we have to work with cities and churches and groups to coordinate this stuff. It takes a tremendous amount of energy, staff time, money. Just logistically, it's very time consuming and difficult to pull something like that off. Just a handful. We did, I think this year, 125 Walks for Life, right? And it took us 6 months on a shoestring budget to pull it all together, right? Basically six months, maybe 5 months. But when you're talking about shutting down entire cities, just because, who are these people? You have to have a leadership structure. You have to have multiple millions of dollars to pull something like that off. That was a shot across the bow. I'm talking about the highway shutdowns, just in the campus shutdowns with the pro-Palestine initiatives, protests. They were telling America and law enforcement that they have the ability to do what they're threatening to do. And we know for a fact that look up the John Brown Gun Club, look up the Puget Sound Gun Club. These are extremist left-wing Antifa-related groups that are preparing people, training people to use lethal force against an indigenous population in the United States. I think in terms of the way in which fourth-generation waves of warfare attacks happen, the next wave of attack is coming. And by virtue of how the level of lethal violence that has been used by these various types of people piggybacking off of these left-wing issues like environmentalism with IVF, with the bombing of the IVF clinic, or the Palestinian killings of the embassy staffers in D.C., things like that, you're going to find that they're going to find a way to unite these groups. And some of the groups don't need uniting because it's the same people. Like the transgender people are the same people as the pro-abortion people, and oftentimes the same people as the environmental people. And they just get together and they do these things. So we've got to find a way to get to the leadership. And I think if Dan Bongino, the deputy FBI director, is serious about finding out who leaked the Dobbs case at the Supreme Court, this massive breach of security, which sparked the Maoist prairie fire of violence against pro-lifers over the last couple of years, that will lead them to understanding who firebombed CompassCare, who firebombed Wisconsin Family Action, and that'll lead them to the leadership of international Antifa. I think it'll lead them to the funding sources, which I think you're going to be very surprised who the funding sources are. I think it'll lead them to other political bad actors within the upper echelons of federal government and state government in the United States that are conspiring to undermine the constitutional rule of law in the United States. But this revival, this kind of political revival, this conservative revival that we've been seeing with respect to President Trump's second term, I think is generating a lot of activity. And by the way, I predicted that would happen too. I predicted that if Trump got elected the second time, we would see another wave of BLM-type violence, similar to what happened starting in his first term in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. And it just kept escalating and escalating. So we're going to see a continued escalation, but I think you're going to see crossover into other countries as other countries begin to wake up to the realization that their constitutional rules of law have also been infiltrated by Antifa sympathizing type individuals who just allow who turn a blind eye to this kind of illegal activity, and in fact begin to blame the victims of the violence for the illegal activity. The communist chaos dragon that is being fomented by Antifa, I think, is going to have some manifestations in the United States in not just this summer, but moving on into the next couple, 3 years, which will include shutting down cities with an intent to cripple the American economy. You saw that happen with the 9/11 attacks, the World Trade Centers. The World Trade Center attempt was to basically lock down and destroy the economic engine of America, because it's essentially buttresses the economy of the free market globally. And of course, the free market is, by Antifa's definition, fascism. My hope is that the CIA, if it's not as corrupt as the FBI was, maybe still is, will get involved with Interpol and dig deep into what Antifa is doing at an international level, that they would help root it out within the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, and in places and Antifa hotbeds like London and Berlin. My hope is that Pete Hegseth will understand its role in what's going on in the Middle East, that Marco Rubio would be aware of the fact that Russia is not interested in maintaining nation-state sovereignty with respect to Ukraine because it's Russia and they're Marxists, that Ed Martin Jr., the new assistant deputy AG assigned to direct the DOJ's weaponization working group, and the U.S. Attorney General for Civil Rights Division, Harmeet Dillon, would review the FBI's case file on the Antifa firebombing of CompassCare and the collusion of state representatives in New York and other places like Hawaii, Massachusetts, and even Seattle, Washington. Federal officials like Merrick Garland, former U.S. Attorney General, Kristen Clark, former Assistant U.S. Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division. I think government looking into Google and Yelp for their censorship and their collusion with Letitia James, Attorney General of New York State, to engage in conspiracy against rights for pro-life people. All this stuff needs to happen. We need to start seeing arrests and indictments and imprisonments. And we need to take a look at what's going on with these people. How do you deal with somebody like this guy in Boulder, Colorado, who just comes out of the bushes and firebombs individuals? He's an illegal immigrant. This is an act of war. They've literally declared war on the United States and are engaging in acts of war on our soil. You're gonna send them to the justice system, or are you gonna send them to Guantanamo Bay? This is the problems that we're facing right now. And I'm thinking this isn't going to go away, and we're doing ourselves no good service by treating these incidents as isolated events. We have to take a look at the global kind of international insurgency that is Antifa and their ultimate goal to upend, dismantle, and destroy the current nation-state system that we all take for granted. Again, they don't care about abortion. No, they don't care about Palestine. They don't care about they don't care about the environment. I've said this before, I'll say it again. They care about one thing, and their stated goal is to destroy the nation-state system to pave the way for a global communism. And communism is anti-Christian. Just read Solzhenitsyn, read Karl Marx, read anything that Mao Zedong embraced or Lenin embraced. These are specifically anti-Christian at heart. And so it's important for us as believers, as Christians, to be alert. Jesus commands us to be alert, to be aware of our surroundings, and to educate the world about what it means to be human under God with respect to the Great Commission. Teach the world all that I've commanded you, And he's created us for good works for such a time as this. And some of those good works are simply educating the world about simple truths about what it means to be a human, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what marriage is all about, what it means to be created in the image of God and the value of humanity, the inherent value of humanity, the infinite value of a human being from the moment of fertilization to natural death, and all the cascading ramifications for government policy and the justice system. I'm Reverend Jim Harden. This is Proof of Life.